Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Norma Peña. Robert and I are specialists of the innovation for the IADB section. Key is based in Ecuador, and Norma leads the division on preventing violence against diverse populations at headquarters. We welcome you very warmly to the event to be proud of being who we are. More inclusive societies for LGBTQ plus individuals. And through this event, the IADB joins the different events that are being held worldwide aimed at developing a more inclusive and fair societies for all. To begin with, it is our honor to listen to the welcoming remarks prepared by the president of the institution.
Around the world, Pride Month is celebrated in June. It is a reminder of the power and value of diversity and of the achievements and contributions of LGBTQ plus communities. During this month, we reflect on the continuing efforts to achieve equality and equity, and despite recent progress, we still have so much more to do. In Latin America and the Caribbean, exclusion and discrimination limit development and growth for individuals, communities, and countries. And still, in 2023, lives are lost. Recent data from 10 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean indicate that prejudice and hatred are the cause of 7 out of 10 homicides of LGBTQ plus individuals. In the past year, 60% of worldwide murders of transgender and gender diverse individuals were in the Latin America and Caribbean region. Our work must continue until no one is left out or left behind. In the past 2 years, we have supported several rigorous studies addressing discrimination and bias against LGBTQ plus communities in the region. We want to generate greater insight into the challenges facing these communities and opportunities for more inclusive development. This research can inform better solutions. Our projects promote inclusion and counter discrimination by expanding access to healthcare, job training, and violence prevention. We must build a region where being who you are is a source of pride. Thank you to our panelists and audience for attending today. I wish you a fruitful discussion on how to promote the social and economic inclusions of LGBTQ plus communities in our region. I hope this Pride Month event will serve as another step toward more inclusive, equitable, and just societies. Thank you.
Now, I am pleased to give the floor to the Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge of the Inter-American Development Bank, Ms. Ana Maria Ibáñez Londoño. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to deliver the welcoming remarks to this event. In recent years, we've seen progress, a greater commitment around the countries of the region towards social and economic inclusion of people with sexual orientation and gender and diverse gender orientation. However, in spite of these major efforts aimed at preventing and penalizing both bullying as well as violence-based violence, stigma and discrimination continue to exist and generate major impacts on economic development, translating in negative impacts to society. This cannot be denied. To deny a part of the population of reaching their potential creates excluding societies. Evidence shows that implementing policies aimed at removing social and economic barriers that exclude people with diverse sexual orientations and gender identity not only contributes to ensuring individual rights, it also generates benefits, as I mentioned earlier, to these communities and to the countries of which they are part. A number of studies have shown that barriers preventing their full inclusion, participation, and access to public services limit the economic development of countries. In other words, to advance towards inclusion of LGBTQ plus individuals is also to foster the economic and social development of the countries in the region. And the commitment of our bank in promoting this agenda is undeniable, and it is made evident by its key instruments of work in the member countries, that is knowledge generation, technical and policy dialogues, and the technical and financial support provided to countries. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges to implement policies aimed at preventing violence and socioeconomic inclusion of LGBTQ individuals is the limited information that exists about this population. In spite of having certain data, these LGBTQ plus individuals are practically invisible in statistics, and very little is known about the challenges they face. Without data, as we all know, it's impossible to develop accurate public policy to analyze its impact, measure its effects, and even to enhance them. For example, it's important to promote the inclusion of questions about social inclusion and gender identity in surveys in order to collect representative and accurate information about the barriers and obstacles that they face, as well as their needs. Recognizing this importance, the bank has been working with the different countries in order to improve the existence of data in the region and to expand the existing research on the matter. With the support of Canada and France, we now have the initiative about knowledge on gender and diversity, GD Lab, promoting the development of rigorous research and generating robust evidence about the gaps faced by the LGBTQ plus population in the region. Rigorous research conducted throughout the region and funded by the IADB have allowed to identify the challenges in order to estimate the size of the LGBTQ plus population in Mexico. But we don't know this same information for the other countries. The accuracy to identify inequality in the labor market in Colombia, discrimination against LGBTQ plus individuals in the home market in the region, among others. We also have technical and policy dialogues, which are informed on the basis of representative and quality data, enabling the exchange of knowledge and to explore opportunities to generate policies, public policy that will address the inequalities faced by LGBTQ plus individuals. During the second half of this year, we will be conducting the regional policy dialogue with the national statistics offices of the region in order to exchange with these offices best practices for collecting diversity data to expand the amount of data that we have, especially on sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as ethnicity, race, and disabilities. As important as it is to produce knowledge and evidence and to organize these technical and policy dialogues with the country to be able to respond to the gaps faced by the LGBTQ plus populations through these projects. And we have very important projects that we have been carrying out. I'll give you two examples, which in my opinion are highly valuable. First, the integrated program to reduce and exclude violence in Brazil, prioritizing the LGBTQ plus individuals, as well as transgender and travesti information, and the mobile unit to provide health care to victims of violence. Secondly, the program for gender equality empowerment of women in Uruguay, which includes making adequate the services provided to women who are victims of violence. And the third, general surveys about gender-based violence. We also have other projects, which is to strengthen the response of the justice sector to these individuals aimed at preventing violence and discrimination, in addition to providing the appropriate care in the case of to these victims through specific medical care protocols considering the needs of this LGBTQ plus population. On the other hand, BidInvest developed a set of tools and a business case to guide the enterprises in the private sector in their efforts to include LGBTQ plus individuals in the workplace. And the Bid Lab is also developing legal tech, a platform for comprehensive legal services based on technology, which will include these populations to reduce legal discrimination, particularly at the labor and industrial areas. I'd like to close my remarks by emphasizing our full commitment towards these diverse gender populations in the region, also including the work that we do internally in the bank, as I mentioned initially, among our staff reflected in our institutional statistics and our corporate goals. We are very much aware that in order to reach the goals that we've set forth, it is essential to strengthen the dialogue around the diversity agenda with our counterparts throughout the region. And we are making progress along these lines. In 2022, 4 of the 5 documents, development companies of the country strategies that guide our work among the member countries included data on diagnosis and recommendations of specific policy to include social for the social and economic inclusion of LGBTQ plus individuals. We in our institution expect that this event will promote the exchange of ideas and best practices among governments and civil society organizations, international cooperation and academia to work jointly aimed at improving and protecting the lives of people with sexual orientation, diverse sexual orientation, and gender uh, diverse. We hope that you all enjoy this event as much as I'm sure I will enjoy it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Ana Maria, for these remarks on the importance of the interinstitutional efforts in order to develop evidence-based policy to include the LGBTQ plus individuals whom, at the end of the day, benefit the whole society and contribute benefits to the socioeconomic development of the region. I would now like to welcome our consultant to Canada, to the IADB, Karen Reef. Canada chairs the work group on gender inclusion, equity, created by the executive directors of the IADB and Bidinvest by the end of last year. Carrie, welcome.
Happy Pride. Oh, that's very loud. I'm honored to be here today to represent Canada at this important event about pride in being who we are and more inclusive societies during the month that commemorates the first Pride Parade and the beginning of the Gay Pride movement. I am representing Canada here today as a country of people like me with faults and shortcomings, but which is willing to able and ready to learn and to be your ally on this journey we are on together, to support and believe in more inclusive societies for you and for the future of our children so that we can all live with love. Nevertheless, this remains a difficult journey for many people from the 2S LGBTQI+ community, including 2 of my siblings, who have been on the front lines fighting for the rights of self-identification, to equal treatment in legal unions and parental allowances, to protections from discriminations and from harm. Canada's progress on 2S LGBTQI+ rights is a result of civil society activists and their legal challenges to discriminatory laws, starting with the 1969 decriminalization of same-sex sexual activity between consenting adults in Canada. It also continues to require hard work to acknowledge our colonial past and present for a long time that erased the knowledge and acceptance of two-spirited Indigenous identities, and we need to make things right. The Canadian government engages with the world with the firm belief that when everyone enjoys the same human rights and can participate equally in all aspects of their lives, we are all the better for it, and we all benefit. We Canadians here at the IDB bring this with us and will always look for allies, for opportunities to learn and to listen from 2S LGBTQ+ communities and to offer our support. As allies and as advocates, and while recognizing that countries are at different stages, we here should call for all states to eliminate laws and policies that discriminate against persons based on their sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or sex characteristics, and to combat all acts of violence targeted towards the 2S LGBTQI+ persons. And we join with the bank in its efforts to do so. We support the essential work being done by the IDB Group on inclusive language, on research to produce the much-needed data through the Gender and Diversity Knowledge Initiative, and on mainstreaming inclusion of diversity populations like the LGBTQ+ communities into operations and policies. Yet I am reminded that there remains much to be done at home as well as in our allyship abroad. I was speaking to a member of the working group on gender equality and diversity at Canada's embassy in Peru, a brilliant woman with a fearless voice who reminded me that if those in power, the higher ups, are not diverse, you aren't going to see your blind spots in your institutions and in your actions. We need leaders that are aware of and acknowledge their blind spots. So here, I must also acknowledge my own blind spot. You will hear from a panel later this morning discussing inclusive security and justice, something that I have been researching for 15 years. In preparation for this discussion, I looked back through my own written work. Here I realized that in my doctoral thesis on security, justice, and governance in Central America, I mentioned the risk of violence to individuals identifying as LGBTQ only once in a discussion of gendered violence, quoting the Geneva Declaration Secretariat. Whilst the social and economic costs of conflict, crime, and violence on lost productivity and labor market access is often discussed in general or male-focused terms, the implications of interfamilial violence, femicide, and gender violence, including LGBTQ, are rarely considered. I then also go on to not consider it. I too failed to ask the necessary questions to people with power when I had the space and the opportunity to do so. For this, I apologize and I commit to step up and do better. Gains, cementing of rights and protections, have always been won through persistent voices and tireless work by those who take a stand. I count among our collective societal gains and the progress tireless activists have made the growing number of individuals of my family, my acquaintance, people at home, and people living around the world who have openly and freely announced whom they love and who they are, including their gender identity. We are making progress, and you can count on me and my country as allies. Before I let you go, on a personal note, and why this is so impactful for me, my sibling who was unable to travel because their passport did not accurately reflect their gender is finally coming to visit us here in Washington, D.C. because of the changes made in Canada on 4th June 2019. From that date, Canadian citizens and residents who did not identify exclusively as female or male can have an X printed on their passport, travel document, citizenship certificate, or permanent resident card. My sibling Sam will travel here on a passport which bears their true gender identity by marking X for human. What an awesome change. Thank you, and best wishes for your event.
Many thanks, Kari, for the very moving personal words.
Before we invite the panel, we will listen to some remarks by the manager of the social sector of the IDB, Ferdinand Regalia. In our region, to have a diverse sexual orientation is frequently a synonym of challenges. Allow me to share with you some data. A survey among students of Chile, Guatemala, Mexico, and Peru revealed that almost 9 out of 10 individuals heard homophobic insults in their school. In the workplace, the LGBTQ plus individuals are discriminated against both in the selection processes as well as within their labor environment. In Mexico and Costa Rica, almost 3 out of 10 LGBTQ plus individuals say that they've received unequal treatment in their work. The numbers for trans individuals are even higher. In Ecuador, 67% of trans individuals say that they have experienced discrimination or violence. But that is not all. Discrimination is extended to other areas, such as the search for a home for a household. An experiment in Argentina, Colombia, and Peru showed that when couples formed by trans individuals applied for a household, either received a 27% less positive response. In IADB, we are working with the aim of closing these gaps. Allow me to share some examples with you. We are supporting a project in Argentina aimed at improving the comprehensive health of LGBTQ plus individuals by identifying those barriers that prevent them to access such services and developing healthcare protocols and training of the healthcare personnel. We are also promoting the fact that the programs aimed at certifying the work skills for women and migrant individuals such as Saber Hacer Vale in Colombia will support the inclusion of LGBTQ plus individuals. And lastly, I want to highlight the work that we are carrying out in Uruguay aimed at preventing and provide care to victims of gender-based violence, including bisexual, trans, and lesbian women. This is a work that involves the efforts of three areas: migration, security, and safety, and gender diversity. I want to thank you all for attending this event that we've organized jointly between the social sector and the sector of institutions for development. Together, we are fighting against prejudice, discrimination, and inequalities throughout the region. I wish you a very productive day.
We thank Ferdinando for his words in terms of how to approach equality and inclusion in areas such as health, education. Let us start with the first panel to identify and remove barriers, reflections on social and economic inclusion of LGBTQ plus people in Latin America and the Caribbean. This being moderated by Maria Caridad Araujos, who is the Director of Gender and Diversity in the IDB, which coordinates the work of the bank to promote inclusion, the inclusion of LGBTQ plus people directly and through the cross-cutting it work in all sectors and in the work done with the countries. Caridad, you have the floor. Good morning. Thank you, Robert, Norma, and thank you all of you who are here. The ADB, we have a full house. I am very happy to be able to welcome you. We are going to reflect on how we identify and remove barriers. And we will hear experiences from the region and from the IDB group in terms of in social economic inclusion of LGBTQ plus people. I have a very good panel. We have Aximili Lara de Carvalhos, National Secretary of the LGBTQ plus people in Brazil. Welcome. Virtually, can you confirm? Francesca McCoy, the manager of the sexual diversity and LGBTQ rights of the Vice Presidency of Colombia. Alexander, Under Secretary of Diversity of the Ministry of Women and Human Rights in Ecuador, and also two colleagues from the ADB, Kalina Lupik, Senior Specialist of Gender and Diversity in the bank, and Laura, who is Gender and Diversity Inclusion Officer in BidInvest. Thank you for accepting to participate. We want to reflect with you what we're doing, how we can give priority to our agenda. In the closing of gaps, we want to hear what Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador are doing, but also we want to tell you how the IDB group is working both in private and public sectors. Francesca, can you hear us? Yes, good morning to all. Very good. So all of us, we're all here. So let's start with the first question. I'm going to start with Timi. So tell us, we know that there's the secretariat has been recently created. What is the availability of data in Brazil for the LGBTQ people, and how do you use this data to design your public policies?
First of all, thank you, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think that you can already have the dimension of what this reality is. I think I am the only transgender person here. So for me, it is very important to be in this political stance, in this political position in my country. I am quite moved. I am going to try to speak as slow as possible so that everybody can understand me. But I will try to be positive, to be able to answer your question. It is a huge challenge for Brazil to produce data because there is a huge absence of data, and the little we used to have was made difficult in the recent period. So it is our main commitment of our recently created secretariat to invest and to improve the production of these data. The IBGE, which is the Brazilian institute responsible for the census, is already applying the census, and a historical demand of has not been accepted, and the coming census will only occur in 10 more years. But the same IBGE does develop other types of censi in the area health, public services, that we have already begun acting to include in our coming census the sexual orientation and gender identity in an effort to overcome this huge gap. The little data we have comes from public services that register, for example, violent deaths in the Unified Health System, the SUS, if there are records or not. Education, some states have the field of the social name, just as public security institutions. We want to build a unified data system, including public services and social protection, so that we are at least able to understand what type of access is being sought by the LGBTQ plus in Brazil and what type of care is being offered. This is an effort we want to begin implementing over this period so that we are able to overcome this weakness of data that does occur in Brazil. Thank you very
Very
much. It is
important, the efforts in terms of research and administrative data to understand better the gaps and the users of the services. Now, Francesca, I have a question for you. Considering the efforts of the Colombian government to strengthen and broaden the LGBTQ plus agenda, what are the main challenges in the country to access basic services, especially in health, by LGBTQ plus people? Good morning. I agree with Simi in terms of the importance of the recognition and characterization of LGBTQ people in different spaces in the health sector. There is a great failure on the baseline, recognition and definition of people with different identities, gender diversity. There's lack of knowledge, lack of context of the data needed within the rights to health, framework of rights to health, or incomplete data. Another important issue has to do with sexual and reproductive health. This has to do with clear policy for people who live with HIV. The care should be continuous, and in Colombia, they face barriers for care, and this means that a person may not have access to health, and their treatment is seriously affected. Also, in what has to do with menstrual policies. In general, they don't include non-binary people or trans men, and that needs to be reviewed more clearly, especially non-stigmatization of LGBTQ plus people that enter the health sector. We receive complaints in terms of when an LGBTQ plus person goes into a healthcare center. And I'm going to try to be more concise. I'm sorry. There's important problems in mental health we must make sure that LGBTQ plus people are not included in pathologies. The experience of trans people, non-binary people, it's important. Work has been done in the recognition of DCM 5 and 10, but in the Colombian regulations, this has not been included. Also, mental health should be not only for LGBTQ people, but it should cover the population as a whole. And the last point that I want to mention is access barriers in general. We need to work on that in Colombia, and it has to do with lack of knowledge in terms of gender identity, trans people, that we are not recognized in terms of gender. We're not allowed to change our names. People are stigmatized. The availability of medication, that's always been a problem. There's no specialists that we need in psychology, psychiatry, endocrinology, and it's important to work in making those services available, as well as the need for healthcare professionals to have this empathy and to be experts in the recognition of the needs of people who have non-hegemonic gender identities. Thank you for Francesca. You have a very broad agenda in health, a lot that we have to do still. The next question, Alexander, is for you. In Ecuador, there was great progress in the collection of data and strategies to improve the access of LGBTQ plus people to public services. What were the most important challenges that the Secretariat has faced in this effort? It's a pleasure to be here. My greetings from the government of Ecuador, which I represent. I would like to thank the IDB for this time, and let me remind you that the IDB was the first institution that came to us when we started to institutionalize our administrative unit like CIMI. This is new in Ecuador, and the IDB decided to go from discussion to action with a technical cooperation that we share regionally with Argentina and Costa Rica, which is just access to justice for LGBTQ plus people. So I want to recognize and thank the IDB that not only do they offer the space for the discussion, but they have concrete actions to create rules for access to justice for these populations. In terms of your question, it's been a great challenge. And Simi, I think our experience has been similar in terms of what it means to give an articulated response by the state to a need that is historical of the LGBTQ plus populations. The institutionalization of an administrative unit that would articulate the work trying to meet the needs of these populations is fundamental. As we create this Undersecretariat of Diversity, it's made it official and has given them representation. Me, as a gay person, I represent a population that historically was invisible in my country. So the challenge is historical. It's been a very large challenge, and actions are urgent because the needs have been historically violated. We've been getting data. We have 3 statistical processes. We've already included the variable of gender and sexual orientation in our census. The census was just finished in January, and we will have the results at the end of the year. We were able to include sexual orientation and sexual identity in the census and the jails in the country. And we have the official data that's already been published in the official page of the National Statistics and Census Institute. And also, we know that because of these statistical processes, there is under registration, under recording, lack of information. Not all the LGBTQ plus people is accessed. So we have a pilot survey of life conditions for these populations. And we will be working in the 24 provinces of Ecuador. It's going to be a national process. So it's going to be a statistical study. The lack of regulations is also a great challenge for us to implement specific actions. We have a recognition at the level of constitutional rights, but the legislative in my country has a debt with LGBTQ plus populations. It has not included the norms in the Constitution and the decisions by the Constitutional Court when they created regulations and eliminated laws that go against the constitutional rights or included in the Constitutional Court's awards. And even in the awards by the Inter-American Human Rights Courts, Ecuador has joined the court, and we have to follow their decisions. This is a tool that allowed us to implement 140 actions in the 128 agencies of the state to create political policies to care for LGBTQ plus or to provide services for this population. We have now created a national norm for the whole of the Ecuadorian state. The lack of data is, and this is my last point, has been resolved with the statistical processes so that we can face the challenges in the country. Thank you, Alexander. And I think it's very good that you be able to advance in data, because that's very important for public policy. Now, Karina. Karina, we heard from the president, from the vice president of sectors, social sector as well, about the commitment of the IDB with LGBTQ plus people inclusion. Institutionally, what are the bases for this commitment? Good morning. Good morning to all of you who are here in person. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this panel and to get to know people with whom we work in general. So let me begin by things that maybe people here know very well, but people outside the bank do not. We have two very important documents in the bank that guide the work we do in gender and diversity. One is the sectorial framework for gender and diversity, and the other one is the action plan for gender and diversity. These two documents were updated in 2022 with specific targets that as an institution we have to meet to support the LGBTQ plus population. Amongst those targets, between 2022 and 2025, 10% of the new operations have to include explicit support to the inclusion of LGBTQ plus people. That is an enormous challenge, because now only 2% of our operations support explicitly this population. So this is an enormous challenge for the institution, because as the panelists said, there is a very important lack of information. So the bank is intensively using the GD Lab initiative. Ana Maria mentioned it this morning. And from there, we've been promoting the creation of 7 studies focused on this group of the population. And something that's very beautiful is that thanks to these studies, 3 of these studies were incorporated in a section of the Economy Association Latin America, SEA. It's a very select group of economists and members of the academic sector that for the first time they've included this. We may think these are small steps, but we've had an impact, and it gives us enormous joy and is our commitment with the LGBTQ plus population. Thank you, Karina. Now, Laura. Laura, tell us about the work you've been doing in the private sector, and how is it that the private sector can have a fundamental role to close gaps in favor of LGBTQ plus people. Thank you, Caridad. It is a pleasure to talk about the private sector perspective, and I am also concerned, as my colleagues are, in terms of the challenge in data collection. Also, I see a source of inspiration the way we've gone forward, and we see how we've been eliminating prejudice barriers. And this month, the Pride Month, when we are celebrating LGBTQ plus, and we see in the cities how people are going out, not only members of LGBTQ plus communities, but people who are partners who want it more visible and to support their rights and dignity. In that sense, it is very important for me to make these populations more visible. There are 40 million people, as Norma was saying a while ago. If we put all the group in one country, it would be the fifth largest country in the region after Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, I think. And these numbers are conservative, especially because of what I said. It's very difficult to collect data. What we do see is that this will change. And we see it in Bid Invest. We've been studying the case, and young people are feeling safer in the self-identification as LGBTQ plus. And this is what we are trying to underscore for our private sector clients. It's an enormous potential. It's a population that has to be considered. It has to be given priority from the point of view of the employer and the consumer. And let me talk about the consumption. In 2017, Credit Suisse made an estimate where they calculated that the group had a purchasing power of $3.7 billion. And this is the GDP of Germany that same year, one of the strongest economies in the world. In 2017, there was an estimate for Mexico. Only in Mexico, the purchasing power was $65 billion in consumption. So given this, we see that there is an opportunity of business, a market opportunity that has to be taken advantage of. And how do we do it? To take advantage of the benefit, companies have to open their doors, hire, promote, retain the LGBTQ plus talent. Why? Because for a very simple reason, the only way in which companies will be able to offer products and services that are tailored to the needs of this group and their preferences and specificities. These new perspectives in work are innovation. So companies not only would be innovating, there are studies that say that when you have more diversity, more inclusion in your workforce, you have more productivity and more profitability. This study tells us that there are companies that can get 12.5% more profit when they have inclusive processes for this group versus those companies that do not. And that is shows how important it is to take in this group into account. We have the data. We were able to study it because on June 22nd, we're going to launch a publication which is called Pride in Action. And we show there an X-ray of the region showing the group in terms of work and the discrimination in the different countries in the region. Also the business case, what it is that the private sector has on the table. And third, and most important, we have a set of tools and questions that can help the companies in the process of transformation, policies that are more inclusive for the group. So that is the role of the private sector as facilitating the process. Labor inclusion is crucial. We're working on that and offering advice to our clients so that we can help them in this process.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for enriching the conversation with a private sector perspective and the economic case as you are presenting to your customers in favor of inclusion. We've heard about many initiatives and efforts that come together in the region in favor of this agenda in an inspiring fashion. And it helps us launch this working session that we will have today and tomorrow. We thank all the panelists for accompanying us today. Francesca, thank you for being here with that beautiful blue sky behind you in Bogota. We hope that the rest of the day is equally productive. It's been a true honor to share these moments with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Caridad. Thank you, Simi, Laura, Francesca, Alex, and Karina. Thank you, Robert. We will continue with the agenda. The commitment of the bank with promotion of diversity goes beyond the dialogue, operations, and knowledge that comes hand in hand with the countries. The IDB recognizes and celebrates diversity in all working areas and has policies that seek that all people feel welcome. To know more about the commitment of the Inter-American Development Bank with diversity in this institution, I invite you please to come forward. Elise Wus Archambault, advisor on diversity and inclusion of the Department of Human Resources, and Luis Lopez Torres, president of IDB Globe. Welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I know that all this is very oriented to the external sector, the external work of the bank towards countries, but there's also the inside. There's also what we as an institution do for the benefit of our employees. I represent IDB Globe. IDB Globe is the guide, the project resource group that represents LGBT personnel and partners within the IDB group. We were founded in 2010, and today we have 327 members currently between LGBT personnel and allies partners. Our mission is based in 4 pillars. And the fundamental principle, promote non-discrimination based in sexual orientation and gender identity, also to support inclusion, integral inclusion of LGBTQ plus within the IDB group, to increase awareness and education and acceptance of the community within the group. Within the group itself, we also serve as focal point, as guide, as mentor, champions. We provide advice and we advocate for the right and benefits for the LGBTQ personnel. It is important to mention that we don't want more. We want equality. It is a principle of equality. The same benefits for all employees, that these benefits be also applicable to the LGBTQ community. Because of lack of time, I'm not going to say everything that we have done. However, we work immensely with activities that are of a social nature, that promote cohesion of the group. Also, we work in academic activities and professional activities. Now, I would like to speak about our 2023 work plan. And on the first item, I want the lead to help me. Presence in programs and institutional policies. Thank you, Lucio. Good morning. We are very enthusiastic this year because we are going to launch our new diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging framework to put into practice the aspects of diversity and inclusion of our people strategy. And we collaborate greatly with the Globe and other group of employees to move forward. And the framework, we enunciate our commitments in each area. And for example, in this case, today, more than 6% of our labor force identifies as LGBTQ plus. And we want to continue increasing, especially in positions of leadership, but as Lucio said, to increase that sentiment of belonging, of inclusion, so that all feel that we can come to work being ourselves.
Thank you so very much, Elise and Luis, for sharing with us these efforts and initiatives and policies which promote a more inclusive work environment and enhance the sense of belonging to an organizations. But as Laura mentioned earlier, it is related to a greater economic productivity and greater value assigned to these organizations. Thank you so very much. And I'm very pleased to give the floor to our second panel that will discuss inclusive security and justice challenges and promising practices to ensure, to guarantee the access of such services to the LGBTQ plus populations. And our moderator will be Natalie Alvarado, coordinator of the Security and Justice uh, uh, department. She is a supporter of including LGBTQ plus individuals in all policies, but also aimed at strengthening the work of the different institutions of the security and justice area in order to better interact with these populations. Welcome, Natalie, and welcome all. Thank you very much, Norma, Robert, and welcome all to this panel and to the more than 150 people who have joined us virtually, which we see how interesting this meeting is to all. I want to welcome our panelists, joined by Mariela Laboceta, who is a federal attorney from the specialized criminal unit in violence against women from Argentina, Alexandra Trigueros, advisor on gender equality and human rights of the Unity for Gender Equality Ministry of Justice and Peace, Costa Rica, Marcela Sanchez, Executive Director from Colombia Diversa, welcome. Helen Kennedy, Executive Director of EGAL Canada. Welcome all. Let us start with Mariela Laboceta, who is the general attorney from the specialized unit on violence against women. Could you tell us about the progress that has been achieved in Argentina? I believe that we have much to learn from Argentina and how specifically from these different prosecutor's office, the access of LGBTQ plus populations to justice has improved. Thank you. Hello, hello. I'm going to try to answer your question by sharing with you case story of something that happened in Argentina, of the murder of a travesti leader, which is useful to explain how through the justice system we can transform this justice, which is very exclusive and discriminatory and promoting impunity, I would even say, a justice into a justice system that will provide a response to these populations. And frequently, these are situations related not necessarily to rules or to norms, but to the practice of the law. This occurred in 2015, which coincided with the explosion of the movement Not One More, Ni Una Vez, that later expanded throughout the region, as well as the creation of this specialized division focusing on women, which has a significant presence throughout our territory. When she was murdered, the first thing that we did with the Attorney General was to say, we are in the face of a crime that can be a symbol. So let us, at the national level, there was no instrument that could be applied in this case. And with the intervention of our specialized unit, we deployed an investigation under the legal terms of the uh, facilities provided by the law. But the first challenge, we were very happy because we said, let us investigate a femicide, because this was a travesty women. Among the early meetings that we held with a number of civil society organizations, we sat around the table with them and say, what are your demands? Tell us what's happening. What are your concerns in terms of the process? And the first thing that they told us, another very well-known leader who has died since, Luana Verdi, very well-known in Argentina, says, we, for many, many years, we were trying to uh, uh, to s- to stop that being treated as men, and now you want to treat us as women. That's the first thing. So there, that represented a challenge in terms of the strategic litigation. She belongs to the strategic litigation unit, and the first challenge was to sit, well, the first change in strategy, in the litigation strategy, was first to sit down with the communities, with their claims, with their demands, and we developed a strategic partnership that the demand, a number of associations came together to organize a common strategy. And the first objective of the litigation was a political litigation, just as they had been done historically with the development of the whole concept of femicide, and and bringing this down to the rules all and the norms all throughout the region. Well, we also launched a process, or a process started, to see whether this concept of a travesticide, which are the crimes against LGBTIQ individuals in the region, uh, based on their sexual orientation, could be included as one of the objectives of this case. So, and I'll go to all the way to the end. It was the first time that in a legal case, the word or the term travesticide was included. Among the other points that can be taken from this case is the whole process in itself was developed in partnership or in dialogue with the civil society organizations who were directly impacted by this case, not only to people very close to the victim, but also others who felt that while she was the first travesti woman who had been provided an identification card indicating her gender, it was, if she was experiencing that, it was experiencing to everybody else. And the fear was based on the fact that there were people who were not only directly impacted by the crime, but also around the case as well. And this active involvement of civil society in this case had repercussions in terms of access to justice, in terms of the reparations, because the process provided reparations all throughout the legal process, and also in the efficacy, in the effectiveness of the evidence, because when we had this direct relationship with people around the victims, this enables us to have evidence, collecting testimonials very directly, people who knew her, to trust a collective, which in general mistrusts the justice system. So all of that is a practice that we can consider to have been a plus. The other equally important thing was the case was not only focused on proving the crime, but also in the context. And Colombians know a lot about this legal practice to place the case within a specific context, because we have to demonstrate the case is a crime, but we must also demonstrate that the case was motivated on her sexual identity. And we invited a Mexican expert, Ms. Regalado, that she came and spoke to the judges for 3 hours, and she narrated the experiences throughout the region. It was very interesting to the case. And last but not least, it was important because the image of access to justice and the image of reparations was the scene of the trial. During the trial, shares of the population, and they not only were filled, they had to set up screens outside because it was full of people dressed in all different colors, because the LGBTQ community is very colorful for, so it's very strong contrast between the image of the justice system, all these people who were there not to be prosecuted or criminalized or stigmatized, but to be recognized, all of them as victims, and that their remarks would be recognized, and we can start considering our justice as inclusive. Thank you for your testimonial. As to the issues of specific attention provided to specific population groups, I want to ask Alexander Diguero from the Ministry of Justice and Peace, what are those specific programs that you have implemented aimed at preventing violence in your jails, and especially the services per se, but in guaranteeing the rights of the LGBTQ plus populations beyond these jails? This is a blind spot where frequently we do not recognize these specific needs in our jail system. Alexander, thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In Costa Rica, I'm going to share with you the experience of what we are doing in Costa Rica in terms of the jail system, and to advocate for the rights of the LGBTQ plus individuals in our jails. We already have specific rules, and this is one of the greatest step forwards that we've achieved nationally. In 2017, on the 24th of November of 2017, we published the consultative opinion of the Inter-American Human Rights Court, which enabled our government to move forward in providing benefits to the LGBTQ plus populations. In terms of our jails, or the jail system, we now have a circular letter updated in the year before that, circular letter 05622. This is how it is known within the jail system, that regulates everything on how we treat LGBTQ plus individuals in our jails. It seems to me that it is one of the greatest steps forward that we've achieved with this circular letter, is that we've managed for transgender individuals or transsexual individuals can now select whether they want to be taken to a jail for women or for men according to their gender identity. Also, in terms of their right to health care, the transgender individuals are allowed to undertake the process of sex change within the jail system. If these people are uh, are in jail, they can proceed with their sex change, and they have access to everything that they may need in order to accomplish that process. This circular letter also is based on a practice which includes training of the jail police in relation to the human rights of LGBTQ plus individuals, or with a gender diverse individuals, and specifically prohibits discriminating against these populations in our jails. There are also commissions In Costa Rica, each jail, every jail has a committee, a LGBTQ plus human rights committee formed by a people that represents the psychological area, the law, consultancy, as well as the jail police, and also uh, the counselings, which moves forward, which deals with all the aspects pertaining to the reinsertion of these individuals, of these prisoners once they return to society. These committees meet regularly and they assess these cases of discrimination affecting the LGBTQ plus individuals within the jail that they represent. In addition, the Ministry of Justice and Peace in Costa Rica is closely related to the Ombudsman Office. Right now, we are developing a mechanism so that prisoners may present demands of how their rights have been violated. And as a result of this, there will be greater access to justice. This is the objective of this effort that is being implemented right now. In terms of the jail system, these have been the most important progress at the national level. Thank you very much, Alexander. I believe that, well, congratulations to Costa Rica. The Latin American jail systems already pose a major challenge in terms of major violations of human rights. So this progress will be essential for the most vulnerable populations within our jails. And our next speaker is Marcela Sanchez, Executive Director of Colombia Diversa, or Diverse Colombia. And it's the weather is great in Bogota today, so you lost a great weather. Colombia Diversa is an organization that focuses on protecting the rights of the LGBTQ plus populations through a number of strategies. They've conducted major research and has had significant political influence, specifically. What initiatives could you share with us today that have allowed to visualize the issues affecting these populations, this vulnerable collective? And how have you contributed from your organizations to the assurance of these rights? Thank you very much. Well, I've brought three examples of initiatives that we have implemented, obviously assisted by our partners and allies, the first of which I called if we can, si se puede, yes, we can record violence, particularly homicides against LGBTQ plus individuals. When we launched this work in Colombia Diversa over 15 years ago, the state would respond that we only had that possibility of asking for official information from the state. They said that the death of LGBTQ plus individuals and in violent deaths was zero. And it took us a long time to understand that zero was not that they did not exist, but that they were not registered. Today, there are more or less official data available. And in my second part of my presentation, I will discuss the challenges. But now, the different institutions in Colombia from the public sector will respond the number of deaths. So it's now possible to register, to compare, to identify patterns. We've been able to identify how gay men are assassinated, with what weapons was the cause of death, where, and how their bodies are found, etc. So it is like a good practice, which the second example that I want to share with you today, we've brought this at the regional level. Right now, a regional network exists that registers information received from civil society. What we want to is to strengthen national observatories, but also the possibility of setting up a regional observatory that could receive comparative data from throughout the region. So in this regional network, includes Mexico and Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil. With Brazil, we've had people who leave and return, but the challenge is not to leave Brazil out of the information system. But obviously, Brazil represents almost 50% of the overall information system. When we mentioned that 78% of violent deaths in Latin America, once again, 78% of these deaths occur in Mexico, Honduras, Brazil, and Colombia. And it is important, at least in the regional information system, these are the countries that represent the greatest share. So the idea is to build capacity among the regional groups so as to demand from the states a registration, this registered to show that it can be accomplished, that if civil society was able to do it, the states have even much more tools and resources and will be able to do it much better. Particularly, they will produce official data that we in civil society do not necessarily obtain, or at least that the data will become official, leaving aside whatever difficulties exist to the collection of such data. In these patterns that we've developed, it's very important to consider how part of those deaths, violent deaths of these LGBTQ individuals, relate, as Francesca explained, to social and economic context of exclusion. And also there, we have to focus on that. Most crimes of these LGBTQ plus individuals, particularly trans individuals, refer to economic exclusion, and the different studies and research should focus much more on that, as well as the states, to go deeper into such studies. And the third experience I want to share with you is to go back to what the prosecutor Mariela said, which when she referred to the regional protocols, the idea is to repeat the experience, to replicate the experience with the protocol on feminicides at the regional level, and to develop a protocol, a guidelines for the investigation of LGBTQ plus death, regardless of the degree of certification. We do not want this to be a roadblock that a country has not certified these hate crimes in order to effectively penalize these violent deaths. So we have experience gathered as a result of the development of this protocol on feminicides. We have methodology that could be adapted to develop this regional protocol. And since we're here, we want for other partners to relate, to join us, and to play a very important role, so that this would not be a set of guidelines produced by by civil society exclusively, that it would be something developed jointly by public and private sectors. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcela. And now I give the floor to Ellen Kennedy, Executive Director of the organization EGAL Canada.
Ellen, welcome and thank you very much for your participation today. EGAL is a leading NGO that works to improve and save lives through research, education, awareness, and by advocating for human rights and equality in Canada and around the world. Helen, please, I would like to ask you about the initiative at EGAL, and especially to promote rights, equality, and improve lives of 2S LGBTQ+. Very long, and not only in Canada but also globally. And also, if you can give us the meaning of the acronym 2S LGBTQI+. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and many thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a real privilege. As mentioned, EGAL is Canada's 2S LGBTQI human rights organization. We have been in existence for over 30 years in Canada. We primarily, in our initial stages, did our works through the courts. We took, I think, 14 cases to the Supreme Court of Canada, and I'm happy to say that we have a 100% success rate in that arena. The acronym is different in every jurisdiction. The international acknowledged acronym is LGBTQI. In Canada, we put 2S in front of our acronym because it recognizes our Indigenous communities, and it stands for Two Spirit. So that's a very quick Coles Notes version of what the acronym is. EGAL's work primarily is based on an acronym, REAL, Research, Education, Awareness, and Legal Advocacy. Our whole process of how we do this work is based on research. We develop the data, we look at the gaps, then we identify programmatic work based on those gaps, and then we implement those programs. And one of the programs that has been very successful, both in Canada and globally, is work around the judicial system, policing, and access to justice for the 2S LGBTQI community. We have been very successful in partnering with the Toronto Police Service, which for generations, decades, the 2S LGBTI community and the police have had a very what can I say, not a great relationship. History would show that the police have targeted our communities. They've often, we've been doubly victimized when we do report crimes to the police services. So our objective as an organization was to change those hearts and minds within the judiciary and within the police service so our communities would feel safe when they went to report an incident of hate, hate-motivated crime, hate propaganda. So we have partnered with the police service. And with this program, we've traveled the world implementing training to the judicial systems in various jurisdictions, both at the ground level with police services themselves, but also at the judiciary through lawyers, through judges, through partnerships with universities. For example, we have a partnership with a university in India, the Jindal Law School, where we have partnered with them on a development of a trans-specific legal advocacy training program. We recently wrapped up some work for the World Bank in the Western Balkans, where we developed a training program to be implemented within that region, targeting police and the judiciary. We've also done frontline police training in Ukraine up until recently, where we traveled the country and implemented a series of training programs on the ground with police services. And the training is very, very basic. It's basically around gender, it's around gender identity, gender expression, language, the different identities within our community, and basically discussing access to violence. Recently, we wrapped up a training program in the Caribbean where we did training for 9 Caribbean countries with senior police officers, superintendents, commissioners, in an intensive 1-day training for the senior level officers, and then a 2-day training for 17 officers from those 9 jurisdictions. And I think the significance of this program is that it is in partnership with a police service. So we have the civil society organization, the experts and the subject matter experts on the ground, accompanied by a police officer in uniform that they speak directly to the police service in their own language. It's a very difficult training, and it's very, very difficult to do this work because you're dealing with incredible bias, religious fundamentalism, and historically groups that don't, like, we have never worked well with the justice system. We've always been victims of abuse at the hands of police services. And we don't use the word police force in Canada. We use the word police service because we believe that that's what the police are there for, to serve us, not to inflict further victimization on marginalized groups. So, you know, these programs they take a long time. This is a long game. It takes a long time to shift a culture. We know from the work that we do, and specifically the work in Canada, we have, for the most part, very good legislation, although we can learn from Argentina around our employment equity standards for trans inclusion. However, for the most part, we have good legislation. However, what we don't have is a culture of inclusiveness. We have to change the hearts and minds of the everyday Canadian to be more inclusive and more open to diverse gender identities, diverse families, before we can really make a difference. So these are just some of the programs that we work on, but these are, I would say, some of the most significant and certainly some of the most impactful for our community members in their day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Helen. I think two great highlights here is the importance of data. So there is an affirmation that without data, we cannot really promote a strong and robust agenda in this topic. And the second one that I think is key is how we change really perceptions, belief, and cultural behaviors.
We have to conclude with this panel tasted of very little, as we say in my country. I hope this is the beginning of new dialogues. We want more institutions talking as we did today. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you for participating in this panel. This partnership, I hope will continue working with the bank. We are committed to work to improve transparent, equitable access of LGBTQ populations to services of security and justice. Thank you all. Please stay in your seats, don't stand up. Thank you, Natalie, Helen, Marcela, Mariela, and Alexander for sharing so clearly and so precisely and with their examples the advancement and challenges in the Marcela talked about communication, and here let me make use of this space to pay tribute to Paula Pineres. I don't know if we have her picture, great partner of the bank who supported transformation through movies and television by producing movies through Netflix. They work to change stereotypes and underscore problems such as the traffic of people, and LGBTQ plus people are very vulnerable.
We are extending a warm embrace to her family, her friends who are connected. Speaking about communications and emphasizing that discrimination, that victimization is worldwide, and we wanted to have in this event a voice coming from a multilateral institution operating in a different region. This is why we have the honor of listening to Chantal Vaughan, Director of the United States before the Asian Development Bank, the first LGBTQ plus lesbian person that was ratified by the United States as director of the Asian Bank, representing the United States with the rank of ambassador. Do we have the video to show?
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and fellow development partners at the Inter-American Development Bank, I send you warm greetings from Manila, Philippines. Happy Pride Month. I would like to extend a special greeting to my dear colleague, Fabiana Jorge, the U.S. Alternate Executive Director at the IADB. It has been a pleasure getting to know her even before our confirmation. Together with the World Bank ED, Adriana Kugler, we have great champions on the board of the multilateral development banks who are dedicated to advancing the cause of inclusion, particularly for LGBTQI+ individuals. It is truly an honor for me to be here today, celebrating Pride and sharing with you some insights into the work we're doing at the Asian Development Bank. The challenges we face today are more complex and urgent than ever before. Extensive research indicates that LGBTQ+ individuals often find themselves at the lower rungs of the economic ladder. Now, I would like to take a moment to shed light on 3 significant areas of work that have consumed my attention since assuming my role at the ADB. These areas are crucial to advancing inclusion and creating a better future. First, and foremost, I must acknowledge the commendable steps taken by the ADB towards fostering inclusion. We're making progress because our member governments are actively requesting support. Secondly, I have actively advocated for the inclusion of SOGIESC, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, protection at the ADB's updated safeguards policy statement. The ADB safeguards policy is currently under review. And our engagement with the bank and the LGBTQI+ community has been significant. Here, I want to credit the IADB safeguards policy, which was approved by the IADB board in 2018. The IADB safeguards is a standalone gender safeguard with generous language regarding SOGIESC protection. Thirdly, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of establishing connections with international and regional networks. Lastly, I want to emphasize the crucial importance of collaboration, particularly with the U.S. government. The USAID LGBTQI+ coordinator understands the critical significance of collaborating with ADB and other multilateral development banks to further its commitment to SOGIESC inclusion. We are dedicated to working together, considering the unique social cultural context of our developing member countries, and aligning with the legitimate aspirations of governments, LGBTQI+ civil society, and individuals who should never be left behind. Together, I'm confident that we can achieve extraordinary feats and forge a world where every person is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, to foster a prosperous, resilient, sustainable, and inclusive world where no one is left behind. Once again, I extend my deepest gratitude for your unwavering commitment and dedication to the work we undertake. Let us make most of our time together and ensure that our efforts truly serve those we are here to support. Thank you.
Many thanks to Chantal Wong, the Executive Director of the United States at the Asian Development Bank.
We are pleased to know that we share the same commitment and vision, and that alignment is instrumental to work together and so that our efforts be amplified. To conclude today, I will give the floor to Roberto de Michele, Head of Division for Innovation, to serve the IDB citizen. Roberto has generated a commitment of the division and the institutional strengthening to provide better services to all the citizens. Roberto, the floor is yours. Thank you, Robert. It's a bad idea to invite me for the opening words, but it's even worse to invite me for closing words, especially after the quality of the presentations and conversations, the dialogue, the topics that have been dealt with. I was talking to Dr. Lokiposio. They don't exist anymore because it's all registered with the ideas that were discussed. But since we follow rules, let's follow rules partially, especially giving thanks. So important. But I want to add a couple of ideas that have come out of the conversations that you have begun. We all agree that the strengthening of the institutional capability for the closing of gaps in inclusion of LGBTQ plus people, persons, goes through administrative processes that are cross-cutting, that are key, such as strategic planning, elaboration of budget, public hiring, civil service, the judicial power or branch, and other sectors, as for example, health, infrastructure, education, to be able to improve the possibility of providing an answer and closing the gaps that we have. If there is a word that we've heard along these conversations this morning, is data. 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 We need data. When institutions are capable of approaching effectively the needs of the LGBTQ plus persons, there is an environment favorable to the full participation and significant participation of society. This implies eliminating barriers, prejudice, biases, stigmatization, the differences that you indicated regarding culture that exist in all societies. we as an organization have begun to travel that pathway forward. We still have a long way to go, but on our side, modestly, I think that there is a space where multilateral banking sector can improve generation of knowledge. We can also start to work as we're doing with our member states, like with Ecuador, with Costa Rica, with Argentina, and to learn from you. We need to learn from you. What works? Uh, what do you need about what we're doing to face these challenges that we all have? I will quickly go to the thanks. You might not believe it, but it is a very extensive list. Our president, Ilan Gonzalez, is traveling. He just arrived from Israel to Peru. He arrived on Sunday from Israel to Peru. Today, I think he just got another plane to go to Europe to another mission. Anyhow, he recorded this message. Ivana Maria Ibanez, she was with us this morning. Our president of sectors, Carrie Pierce. Ferdinando Regalia, the manager in the social sector. This could have not been made possible if it wasn't the partners in crime, the division of gender and diversity, the commitment to the quality of the people that are here, the knowledge of the bank, their everybody who accompanies us today, very especially Maria Caridad Araujo, Natalie, Robert, Norma, Juanita Dandila, Amelia Jose Martinez, Elena Fava, in communication, together with Patricia Proaño, Daniela Brenes, Lucia Rio, Veronica Cisilva, Maria Jose Martinez. I am certain that somebody's going to pull my ear because you forgot so and so. And all the participants, allow me to imitate Caddy and tell you a personal anecdote about everything. I was checking. We spoke about 32 years of a unhappy sentence in the Supreme Court of my country, the Cha sentence, denying legal personality, corporate personality to the homosexual community in my country. Not a happy rule. Companies, lawyers from my own faculty were representatives in court of Shat, and others created an association called for civil rights. So an idea that I have from this panel and the previous panel is that maybe we need to look at those people who are being educated today at university on how they could help the next generation to undertake the reforms that we all need. It doesn't have to be lawyers. It could be, as you mentioned recently, the health sector, people who work in security, in the penitentiary services. It's a universe of specialists, of people who must help in this initiative. There's no invitation from the IDB that is for free. So after this open activity, the teams will be working in a closed door workshop, elaborating and working on the possibility of this developing specific guides for the sector, guidelines from the results of this workshop. Thank you all and welcome to the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. Thank you.